Montreal's cityscape is a palimpsest. Layers of stone, ambition, and reinvention pressed against the western slope of Mount Royal. Few places in that layered map better illuminate the city's social and architectural transformations than the corridor where Shaughnessy Village meets the historic Golden Square Mile. The story begins in the 19th century when the affluent of Montreal, enriched by shipping, railways, timber, and finance, sought refuge from the crowded streets of Old Montreal. They looked up the slope of Mount Royal and carved out an enclave of grand villas. That enclave evolved into what came to be known as the Golden Square Mile, a compact constellation of mansions and townhouses whose names, Allen, Molson, Van Horn, and Shaughnessy, became shorthand for Canada's mercantile elite. Between roughly 1850 and 1930, the square mile was both a literal and symbolic heart of private wealth. Mansions with imported woods, private galleries, conservatories, and carriage courts that testified to a certain certainty about Montreal's place in the British Empire and the North American economy. Yet history seldom pauses. By the early 20th century, changes in technology, taste, and the economy nudged these families outward or into new roles. The automobile loosened the old spatial logic of the square mile's leafy exclusivity. The Depression and successive social shifts thinned the ranks of families who could afford such estates. Buildings were repurposed, subdivided, or demolished. At the same time, institutions, notably McGill University and hospitals, expanded into the area, knitting new civic functions into the old fabric and setting the stage for another transformation. Immediately west of the square mile, across Atwater and closer to the boundary with Westmount, Shaughnessy Village tells a different but entwined tale. Named in the 20th century after Thomas Shaughnessy, president of the Canadian Pacific Railway and later part of the Canadian Centre for Architecture, the neighborhood was historically mixed, stately residences at its edges and working-class streets nearer to the railways and industrial nodes. The most dramatic alteration came after World War II, when city planners and developers prioritized density. The 1960s and 1970s saw the construction of numerous high-rise apartment blocks in Shaughnessy Village, making it one of Quebec's most densely populated neighborhoods. These towers were not simply architecture. They were a social solution to urban housing demand, and they opened the neighborhood to waves of new arrivals, immigrants, students, and young professionals who reshaped the area's rhythms. Between the old mansions and the modern blocks sits a corridor of institutions and landmarks that have acted as anchors through change. The Royal Victoria Hospital's old pavilions, the McGill campus properties, and private clubs converted into institutional uses further blurred the lines between the private grandeur of the 19th century and the public functions of the 20th. Socially, the meeting of Shaughnessy Village and the Golden Square Mile is a study of juxtaposition. The Square Mile is the city's memory of gilded ambition. Shaughnessy Village is the city's practical response to demographic change and immigration. Where one side preserves the echoes of parlor society and art collections, the other hums with the commerce and domestic intensity of multi-unit living. Yet these differences are not antagonistic so much as complementary. Old wealth seeded institutions that later supported denser waves of urban life, and denser living patterns made it practical for a diverse community to inhabit and reinvent these historic corridors. Architecturally, the area reads like a primer on Montreal's tastes. Sherbrooke Street and adjacent avenues still hold classical facades, Second Empire mansions, and Beaux Arts flourishes, survivors of an era that prized ornament and scale. Closer to Shaughnessy, the modernist slabs and towers of the mid-20th century assert a different aesthetic: efficiency, repetition, and a modest vocabulary of materials. Interwoven between these are adaptive reuse projects, mansion interiors converted for institutional purposes, old facades retained while new glass volumes rise behind them. Those interventions speak both to loss, to the demolition of buildings that once stood here, and to the city's appetite for reimagining its heritage rather than consigning it wholly to memory. Cultural life here has always been more than architecture. Private collections once lent the neighborhood an aura of cosmopolitan taste. Salons and clubs hosted conversations about empire, commerce, and art. Later, institutions that occupied former private houses, museums, departments, and cultural centers democratized parts of that legacy. Meanwhile, Shaughnessy Village's dense residential blocks became fertile ground for small businesses, restaurants, and community services that reflected the city's shifting demographics, an interlacing of Anglophone and Francophone presences, immigrant entrepreneurship, and student culture. The late 20th and early 21st centuries introduced fresh pressures and opportunities. Heritage advocacy groups pushed back against wholesale demolition. Urban planners and developers negotiated ways to integrate new housing and office projects without erasing the area's character. Gentrification ebbed and flowed, and debates over preservation, adaptive reuse, and the social mix of neighborhoods intensified. If there is a broader lesson in the Shaughnessy Village Golden Square Mile corridor, it is about resilience. Montreal's fortunes have neither been linear nor uniform. They have been cyclical, shaped by commerce, politics, migration, and taste. The neighborhoods at the slope of Mount Royal are not museum pieces, nor are they blank canvases. They are living places where the traces of the city's wealth, its social transformations, and its architectural experiments remain visible, contested, and alive. Those who look closely will find in the stonework, the altered facades, and the institutional conversions a story about how cities remember themselves and how they choose, again and again, to carry forward select pieces of their past into new urban futures.
I hope you've enjoyed this video. This channel has more videos of Montreal in the Montreal playlist, which is linked in the description below the video. Channel also has more videos of my adventures bicycling through Latin America, Southeast Africa, Central and Eastern Europe, and I have playlists for all those countries that I've traveled through, available on the same channel, Hum of the Earth. So for more videos of Montreal and other cool places around the world, you can subscribe to the channel by clicking on the red subscribe button and clicking on the bell to be notified when new videos come out. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.